The dust hung thick in the afternoon air, transforming the main street of Redemption Creek into a hazy corridor of gold and amber light. Jake Morrison stood at the edge of town, one hand resting on the weathered fence post, the other shading his eyes as he looked toward the distant mountains. 10 years had passed since he'd last seen this place. 10 years since he'd ridden out with nothing but shame and a promise never to return. Yet here he was, drawn back by a telegram that had found him in Santa Fe, its message brief and urgent: "Your father is dying, come home." The town hadn't changed much, at least not on the surface. The same wooden storefronts lined the street, their paint peeling from years of harsh sun and winter storms. The saloon still occupied the corner lot, its swinging doors perpetually open like a mouth ready to swallow the desperate and the damned. But Jake could sense something different in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before, a fear that seemed to seep from the very boards beneath his boots. He adjusted the worn leather saddlebag on his shoulder and started walking down the main street. Eyes watched him from windows and doorways, faces he half remembered turning away as he passed. Old Mrs. Henderson clutched her basket tighter and hurried into the general store. Two men standing outside the bank stopped their conversation mid-sentence, their hands instinctively moving toward their gun belts before they recognized him and froze, unsure whether his return was a blessing or a curse. The Morrison Ranch sat 3 miles outside town, accessible by a winding dirt road that cut through scrubland and scattered pines. Jake had walked this path countless times as a boy, racing his horse against his brother Samuel, their father watching from the porch with that stern expression that never quite hid his pride. Samuel, the name still brought a sharp pain to Jake's chest, a wound that 10 years hadn't come close to healing. The ranch house looked smaller than he remembered, its white paint grayed by time and neglect. The barn still stood, but several boards were missing, and the corral fence sagged in places where posts had rotted through. This had once been the finest spread in the territory, a source of pride for his father, built with sweat and determination after the war. Now it looked like a dying thing, collapsing slowly under the weight of years and sorrow. Doc Williams met him at the door, his medical bag in hand and exhaustion etched deep into the lines of his face. The old doctor had delivered Jake into this world 42 years ago, had set his broken arm when he fell from the hayloft at age 9, had been there through every illness and injury that marked a frontier childhood. "He's been asking for you," Doc said quietly, stepping aside to let Jake enter. "I've done what I can, but it's his heart, Jake. It's just worn out. Could be days, could be hours." Jake nodded, unable to find words. He moved through the familiar house, past the dining room where his mother had served Sunday suppers, past the study where his father had taught him to read from newspapers and the Bible, up the stairs that creaked with the same notes they'd always sung. The door to his father's room stood slightly ajar. Thomas Morrison lay propped up on pillows, his once powerful frame reduced to angles and shadows beneath the quilts. His face had the gray pallor of approaching death, but his eyes still held that fierce intelligence, that unwavering strength that had defined him for 73 years. Those eyes fixed on Jake as he entered, and something like relief flickered across the old man's features. "You came," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper but still carrying that tone of command. "Wasn't sure you would." "I came," Jake replied, moving to sit in the chair beside the bed. "Got your telegram. Good. We need to talk, and there isn't much time." Thomas paused to gather strength, each breath a visible effort. "The Brennan gang has been terrorizing this territory for 6 months now. They've robbed every bank within 50 miles, killed anyone who stood against them. 2 weeks ago, they came here to Redemption Creek. They robbed our bank, shot Marshal Davies when he tried to stop them. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Marshal Davies had been a good man, fair and honest in a place where those qualities were rare. Is he dead? No, but he might as well be. Bullet shattered his hip. He'll never walk right again, certainly can't wear a badge. The town council sent for a new marshal from the territorial governor, but he won't arrive for another month. In the meantime, the Brennans know we're vulnerable. Word is they're planning to come back, finish what they started. Why are you telling me this? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer, could feel it settling onto his shoulders like a familiar weight. Thomas reached out with a trembling hand, grasping Jake's wrist with surprising strength. Because you're the only one who can stop them. You're the only one with the skill and the experience. I know what you've been doing these past 10 years, Jake. I kept track, bounty hunting across 3 territories, bringing in men nobody else could catch. You've got a reputation now, whether you wanted it or not. Jake pulled his hand away, standing abruptly and moving to the window. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and purple. That's exactly why I can't do this. I'm not a lawman, Pa. I'm not the marshal this town needs. I'm just a man who's good at hunting other men, at living in the shadows they inhabit. There's a difference, is there? Thomas's voice gained strength from somewhere, that old authority rising up one last time. Or is that just something you tell yourself to justify staying away? To avoid facing what happened with Samuel? The words hit like a physical blow, and Jake braced himself against the window frame. He'd known this conversation was coming, had been dreading it since he read that telegram. Don't, he said quietly. I'm dying, son. If I don't say it now, it'll never be said. Thomas coughed, a wet rattling sound that spoke of fluid in his lungs. What happened to Samuel wasn't your fault. You did what you had to do. I killed my own brother. The words came out flat, empty of emotion, because Jake had spent 10 years learning how to say them without breaking apart. Shot him down in front of this whole town because he wouldn't stop robbing and killing, because he chose the outlaw life and wouldn't listen to reason. That's not something you come back from. You gave him every chance. You warned him, pleaded with him, but Samuel made his choices just like you made yours. The difference is, you chose honor even when it cost you everything. That's why this town needs you now. That's why I'm asking you, as my last request in this world, to put on a badge one more time and protect these people. Jake turned from the window, looking at his father's face, seeing the desperation there mixed with pride and love, and the terrible clarity that comes at the end of life. And if I fail, if the Brennans kill me, or I can't stop them, then at least you'll have tried. At least you'll have stood up when it mattered. That's all any man can do, Jake. Stand up when it matters and hope it's enough. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of years and unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Jake nodded, a small gesture that committed him to everything it implied. All right, I'll do it, but I need to know everything about the Brennans. Every detail, every pattern, every weakness. Thomas smiled, the expression transforming his face into something that resembled the father Jake remembered from childhood. Doc Williams has all the information. He's been helping the town council prepare. But Jake, there's one more thing you need to know. The Brennans have someone inside Redemption Creek, feeding them information. That's how they knew exactly when to hit the bank, when the marshal would be vulnerable. I don't know who it is, but you need to watch your back. I always do, Jake replied, but the news troubled him. A traitor in town made everything more complicated, more dangerous. It meant he couldn't trust anyone, couldn't rely on the support he'd need to face 6 hardened outlaws. He'd be alone, the way he'd been alone for 10 years. Thomas's eyes were growing heavy, his breathing more labored. Jake stood and gently adjusted the pillows, pulling the quilts higher. "Rest now, Pa. We'll talk more tomorrow." "No," Thomas whispered, his hand finding Jake's one last time. "We won't, but that's all right. I'm ready. Your mother's waiting for me, and I've been missing her something fierce. Just promise me you'll do this. Promise me you'll save this town." "I promise," Jake said, and felt the old man's grip relax. Felt something pass between them that was both good, bye, and benediction. Thomas Morrison died 3 hours later, just after midnight, with Jake sitting beside him in the darkness. There were no last words, no dramatic final moments. He simply stopped breathing, his face settling into an expression of peace that Jake envied. Doc Williams came up to confirm what they already knew, then helped Jake prepare the body according to the old customs. They would bury him tomorrow beside Jake's mother in the small cemetery on the hill. The funeral was simple, attended by nearly everyone in town despite the fear that gripped them all. They came to pay respects to a man who'd helped build Redemption Creek from nothing, who'd given employment to dozens over the years, who'd always dealt fairly in a world that rarely valued fairness. They also came to see Jake, to size up the man who might stand between them and the Brennan gang. After the last shovel of dirt was patted down and the mourners had drifted away, Jake stood alone at the grave, hat in hand, trying to find words for a prayer he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. It was Sarah who finally approached, moving quietly across the grass until she stood beside him. He'd seen her at the service, but hadn't had the courage to speak to her. Sarah Martin had been Sarah Cooper when he left, young and beautiful and waiting for him to finish what he'd started with Samuel, waiting for him to come back so they could build the life they'd planned together, but he never came back, and eventually she stopped waiting. She'd married Robert Martin, the banker's son, and by all accounts had made a good life for herself. "I'm sorry about your father," she said softly. "He was a good man." He was, Jake agreed, still not looking at her, afraid of what he might see in her eyes. "Thank you for coming. Jake, look at me." It was both request and command, and he couldn't refuse. She'd aged well, lines of life and laughter around her eyes, her dark hair touched with gray at the temples. She was still beautiful, but more than that, she still had that quality of fierce compassion that had first drawn him to her. "I heard what you promised him, that you'd face the Brennans. News travels fast. This is a small town, and people talk, especially when they're scared." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They're bad men, Jake, worse than Samuel ever was. They kill for sport now, not just for money, and there are 6 of them. You can't face them alone. I've faced worse odds," he said, though he wasn't sure that was true, "and I won't be completely alone. There must be some men in town willing to stand with me." Sarah shook her head. "They're all too frightened. The Brennans made an example of Marshall Davies, made sure everyone understood what happens to those who oppose them. The men in this town have families to think about, children to protect. They won't stand with you. Then I'll stand alone." He said it simply, as a statement of fact rather than bravado. "I made a promise to my father. I intend to keep it. Even if it kills you." She reached out and touched his arm, the first physical contact they'd had in 10 years. "Jake, you don't owe this town anything. You paid your debt in blood when you stopped Samuel. Nobody would blame you if you rode away right now." "I would blame me," he replied. "And maybe that's enough." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded as if accepting something she'd already known. "Then at least let me help. Robert keeps the bank's records, knows everyone who comes and goes, every transaction. If there's a traitor helping the Brennans, the answer might be in those records. Let me look through them tonight. Sarah, if the Brennans find out you're helping me, "They won't. I'll be careful. But Jake, you need every advantage you can get, and information is the best weapon we have right now." She squeezed his arm once more, then let go. "Come to the house tomorrow evening, after dark. I'll have something for you." She walked away before he could argue further, leaving him alone with the graves and the setting sun. Jake looked down at his father's fresh plot, at his mother's weathered headstone beside it. "I hope you know what you've gotten me into, old man," he said quietly. Then he turned and headed back toward town, toward the marshal's office and the badge that waited for him there. The office was a small building wedged between the saloon and the feed store, with bars on the windows and a holding cell in the back. It smelled of dust and old coffee, and the particular scent of fear that lingers in places where hard decisions are made. Marshal Davies's badge lay on the desk, the silver tarnished with age, but still carrying the weight of authority. Jake picked it up, felt its heft in his palm, remembering the day his father had first showed him a badge just like this, explaining what it meant, what it cost. He pinned it to his vest, feeling the metal settle against his chest like a target. Then he began to work, spreading the maps and information Doc Williams had compiled across the desk. The Brennan gang had a pattern, he could see that now. They'd been moving steadily west, hitting towns along a specific route, always staying ahead of any organized pursuit. They favored small settlements like Redemption Creek, places where the law was thin or non-existent, where they could strike fast and disappear before reinforcements arrived. Their leader was Colt Brennan, a former Confederate raider who'd never accepted the war's end, who'd turned his military skills toward robbery and murder. His brothers, Wyatt and Jesse, rode with him, along with 3 other men whose names appeared on wanted posters throughout the territory. Combined, they had a bounty of $10,000 on their heads, enough to make any bounty hunter salivate. But bounty hunters operated alone or in small groups, using stealth and surprise. What Jake needed was a different approach, something that would turn the Brennans' strength against them. He worked through the night, formulating a plan, discarding it, starting again. By dawn, he had the bones of something that might work, assuming a dozen things went right and nothing went catastrophically wrong. The odds weren't good, but they were better than trying to face 6 guns in an open fight. The town stirred to life around him as morning came. Jake stepped outside, feeling the weight of eyes on him, seeing the mixture of hope and skepticism on the faces that turned his way. He walked to the saloon, knowing that's where he'd find the men he needed to talk to first. The saloon owner was a man named Jack Porter, who'd run the establishment for 20 years through good times and bad. He was pouring morning coffee when Jake entered, the badge catching the light from the windows. Porter's eyes widened slightly, then he nodded and poured a second cup without being asked. "So you took it," Porter said, sliding the coffee across the bar. "Your father asked you to, didn't he?" "He did, and I need your help." Jake took a sip of the bitter brew, letting it burn away the fatigue. "I need to know everything about the Brennans' visit 2 weeks ago, every detail you remember, who they talked to, what they drank, how they acted." Porter thought for a moment, his brow furrowing. "They came in the night before the robbery, 6 of them, loud and mean. Colt Brennan did most of the talking, making it clear they were in charge. They asked questions about the bank, about when Marshall made his rounds, about who in town might give them trouble. I tried not to answer, but they made it clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate." "Did anyone else talk to them? Anyone seem particularly friendly or helpful?" "Now that you mention it, there was someone. Couldn't see who clearly in the dim light, but someone at a corner table had a long conversation with Wyatt Brennan. Passed him something too, looked like papers. I thought it was strange at the time, but I was too scared to ask questions. This confirmed what Thomas had suspected about a traitor. Jake pressed for more details, but Porter couldn't provide anything specific. Still, it was a start. He spent the rest of the morning making similar inquiries around town, building a picture of the Brennans and their habits, looking for the weakness every group of outlaws eventually developed. As darkness fell, Jake made his way to the Martin house, a comfortable two-story home on the good side of town. Robert Martin answered the door, and Jake saw the flash of recognition, followed by something harder to read. Jealousy, perhaps, or fear, or simply the awkwardness of a husband confronting his wife's past. "She's in the study," Robert said stiffly, stepping aside. "She's been going through the books all day. I hope it helps." Sarah looked up as Jake entered, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with discovery. Papers covered the desk before her, ledgers and records spanning months of transactions. "I found it," she said without preamble. "Or at least I think I did. Look at these withdrawals." She pointed to a series of entries, small amounts taken out over several months, always by the same person. The name made Jake's blood run cold. Tom Wheeler, the deputy who'd served under Marshal Davies, who should have been wearing the badge now but had claimed he was too inexperienced, too scared to face the Brennans. Wheeler had been taking money from the bank, small enough amounts that nobody would notice, but regular enough to show a pattern of need. "He's been paying off gambling debts," Sarah explained, showing him more records. "Big ones, from that poker game that runs in the back of Porter's saloon. He was desperate, Jake, and desperate men do terrible things. He's the one who told the Brennans when to strike," Jake said, the pieces falling into place. He probably thought they'd just rob the bank and leave, didn't realize they'd gunned down his own marshal. Now he's trapped, too afraid to confess, too afraid of what the Brennans might do if they think he'll talk. "What will you do?" Sarah asked. Jake stood, his mind already working through the implications. "I'm going to give him a chance to make it right. And if he won't take it, I'm going to do what needs to be done." He found Wheeler at home, nursing a bottle of whiskey and looking like a man waiting for the end. The deputy's hand moved toward his gun when Jake entered, then fell away when he saw the determination in Jake's eyes. "I know," Wheeler said simply. "I know you've figured it out." "Why?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "Debt, gambling, stupidity, take your pick."